Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome to the special episode that we always do on the birthday of the podcast. Happy birthday to the Faith and Science Podcast. We have done this for 6 full years, and to be brutally honest, I have some travel plans right before the birthday, so I'm doing this a few days early. But I really enjoy doing this in particular podcast because I always find it fun. It's a great time of year to be reflective. It's a great time of year to contemplate where we've come from, where we've been. And this has been a major turning point within the podcast year-wise, and I am really excited about some of the plans that I am still working on figuring out, but that'll come this upcoming year. So let's talk about some of the numbers that I can see on the back end. First and foremost, for being online and being able to actually track, this has by far been the most successful year of listenership. We have over 3,000 listens this year, which I know in the scheme of many podcasts is next to nothing, but I still feel flattered that 3,000 times people clicked on my simple little podcast that I made to listen to, and I think that's incredible. We definitely, I would say, had a better first half of the year than second half of the year. There was a lot kind of going on, I feel like, in the back half of the year, but still beat year over year what we were doing. And so that's really exciting to me. We reached and were listened to in 32 different countries plus one unknown. We were listened to in 44 of the 50 United States. We were listened to in 5 Canadian provinces, 4 different Australian provinces, 2 of the 4 parts of England. It's incredible to me. And for me on this end, it's been amazing watching some of these countries that I probably will never be able to get to, and suddenly seeing their names pop up that somebody or a group of people are listening to me is mind-boggling. This last year, we also had some highs and we had some lows. We had a couple different grant opportunities that I was working on with my wife, and for a couple different reasons, we decided to turn some of those opportunities down. But on the plus side, we also had a couple times where we were able to actually, I did some in-person stuff. If you look back to like the Gus Davis podcast, I already have had some very early plans with some potential other stuff here in early 2024, which is super exciting. And I know, and I am going to make this happen this year. There has been a secondary podcast that I have been thinking about for basically the whole life of the podcast that I've been wanting to do, but I wanted to establish this and to kind of give you a glimpse of what I'm thinking about here. In my head, there is at least 3 podcasts that deal with very similar things that I should be able to do at some point here. And the Faith and Science Podcast is always going to be there, following that revised common lectionary, always going to be there. That's number 1. I think this year I'm going to move into a podcast alongside it that I personally believe will be bigger than the Faith and Science Podcast. And I am really excited about it. It will be definitely taking me out of my comfort zone a little bit, which is always a good thing. And I don't want to give too many details. There's people who I have talked to in person that they kind of know some of that stuff, but I want to keep some of it behind a curtain a little bit. But I fully intend that this year there'll be another podcast that pops up. I'm gearing for once a month. I know I can't launch it here in January right away, so there might be a little bit more gaps here initially, but we're going to be trying something a little bit different this year, and I am really excited about it, and I think it's going to be super exciting, and I'm really curious where God takes that one. It's been amazing to me to see what God is doing with this. To see where God takes that is going to be a whole nother avenue. I also know one of the things that I am looking at doing here for this next year is that I want to increase some of our social media presence on a couple different additional platforms, so I'm probably be looking into some of that stuff. And if you aren't already checking out, again, in every single one of the descriptions of the Faith and Science podcast, I always put our social links. Make sure you're checking that stuff out. And it even has the email directly for the podcast. Feel free to shoot me emails. I would love to hear. I love hearing correspondence back. It's a main reason on why I have those questions week to week. Some of it, yes, for you to think, but some of it's to have that interaction, and I really enjoy that aspect of this. I also am at this position now where I am reflecting a little bit more, because now this is 2 full turns through the Revised Common Lectionary, and that is a little bit trippy. Whenever we get back to Mark, I know that's where I started, and there are things that I can't fully talk about now, and I would guess next year at this time I probably will be able to talk about. But I've done a lot of thinking this last year on what this podcast has done for me, and it's been an amazing ride, honestly, and I'm so excited to see where God has taken this next. One of the things that I distinctly remember thinking about a lot was Gustavus, when I was there and was able to do a talk with the kids, and then we recorded that little podcast, which, again, I'd highly recommend checking that out. The kids had some amazing, and these young adults had amazing ideas and how faith and science are coming together. But I think it's also the aspect for me that I started this podcast in my bedroom that I grew up in. I moved into that room probably in middle school. And I've talked about it some before on how just where I was at mentally and with what was all going on with life, I was not in the best mental space, and that this podcast had so much help for me to kind of get back on the right track mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I still have at times, and I realize I am such small potatoes in the podcasting world versus so many others. But for me, just the ability that having the privilege of going to Gustavus and talking to those kids and seeing how far God had taken this little thing from my bedroom to suddenly I'm in front of high school and college students talking about faith and science and how it's so important to me and why I feel like this is a conversation that we should be having. And I think in that, it's a reminder too that God uses us in ways that we don't always expect. God humbles us. Trust me, I know I've been humbled this last year with how amazing the podcast started and how high the highs got numbers-wise, and then the slump that we kind of hit in the second half of the year, which was still better than basically all the year before, but also how God continues to work through all of it and just say, I have bigger plans. I have ideas that I'm working with you on, and I want you to continue to push forward. So that part of it is exciting, and I'm so excited, honestly, about this next phase of what we're moving into, always starting here another 3-year cycle of what this looks like with the Faith and Science podcast, launching at some point this year at least one episode of this other podcast that I have in my head. I'm so excited about that. I truly believe this is going to be something that God will speak through this, and I'm so excited because I've had conversations, we'll put it that way. I've had conversations that I know that this idea has good footing to at least do well, and however many people it reaches will be great. And it's one of those things where I'm looking forward to having these discussions, conversations, and that's probably enough of a hint already with some of this stuff, and going back and listening to them over time. I'm really excited about that. But I also want to thank you. If you clicked on this and are listening to this, thank you. I couldn't be here without God steering this ship. But it's also a vital part of this is that someone is listening on the other end who isn't just me. those conversations, the posts back, the times that if you see me ever in person, or the different messages that I'll get from people is so amazing. And I don't think people fully get when you create something like this week after week and put that yourself out there week after week, the little bits of reassurance, the little bits of I appreciated that, the little bits of I liked your conversation on this or discussion on that, or I hadn't thought about things in that way, it makes all the difference. And when we look at the world in which we're in and what as faith communities, the challenges that we're running into and how some of these discussions really need to be happening more regularly, it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of this. It's exciting to talk about it. And I just feel blessed that I get to be part of many of your guys' weekly routine. I get to be part of people preparing for worship. I get to be part of people who are curious about the faith and how does science tie in with that. I get to be part of God speaking to places that I may never ever set foot in, but my voice will have echoed there. And what a privilege it's been for me to be able to do that. And I hope and I pray that you continue to find the value that you're looking for in this as God continues to use me as a vessel. Thank you. Thank you for being on the other end of the microphone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for responding. Thank you for caring. We need that in our world. In order for us to share ideas, care about ideas, we need to be able to share ideas and have somebody care. And I'm really excited about that. We hit a lot of really cool milestones this year. We've had podcasts that were downloaded over 100 times this year, which is mind-boggling. We had weeks where we had over 50 people listening to a regular episode within a week. Mind-boggling. So cool for me. Being able to watch people listen and hear and care about so many different things. It's awesome. So let's go through, and again, I will say some of the recent episodes, this is going to be a little unfair, but the most downloaded episodes this last year. And I'm really excited to see that all of these have a 23 on the end of them, which hasn't always been the case when we're at these. So we had Quantum Leaps versus Classic Understanding. Humble Like Mendel was number 2, and that was the first ever podcast that within 1 week we had over 50 downloads, which was so awesome. The 2023 Gus Davis Academy Faith, Science, and Ethics. You Are Called, coming from 9-3. Changing Our Perspective. Plant Share, Does Our Faith? Physically and mentally able to do the call. Don't overlook, quote, waste. The Power Within Water. And challenging our faith and science to move forward. It was a great year, and I'm really looking forward to this next year. I'm excited to see where we're going. I have ideas and plans, and I just pray that you continue to find benefit out of this and continue to support by listening at this point. We'll see if I can get some type of other way, if that would be something where you would actually want to monetarily support this. That would be awesome. I still have a little ways before I feel confident being able to put something together with that, but I'm going to be working on that. But thank you. Thank you for listening to this admittedly a little weird podcast week after week, but also such important podcast, I'd argue, week after week. And it's amazing. 6 years, week after week after week, over 300 episodes. We're here. And so I pray that God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science as we continue to go through this year. And I wholeheartedly mean that when I say that at the end of every week. People always ask, where did I come up with that? Was God. When I was figuring out how I was going to phrase it, it's one of the few times that I've ever typed anything out to read my initial kind of little introduction, and it came to me. And God put it there. And so it's been the catchphrase for years, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So thank you again. I wanted to wish the podcast happy birthday. Happy birthday to the Faith and Science podcast. It's always on the 30th of December is when the anniversary of the first podcast ever going out. I distinctly remember what it was like pushing that button for the first time. The scared of what the heck was this going to do, and little did I know how much of my life was going to change because of it. But it's just another reminder of where we need to take a step of faith and how God then suddenly has, within a year, 3,000 people listening to these podcasts. That's crazy. Still crazy to me. And I know that's not even a huge number in the podcast world, but to me, that's incredible. It's still huge to me. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science. Happy birthday, Faith and Science Podcast. We'll see you next year when we do one of these again.